a little after 5:30. I'll call this meeting to order and would like to welcome Karen to the team. Welcome the City of Forest Lake and the EDA. Could you do a roll call, please?
I will, thank you. Blake Roberts.
Here.
Judy Huntosh.
Here.
Sam Husnick.
Here.
Barney.
Here.
Mark Finneman.
Here.
Jennifer Lorange.
Here.
Joshua Archer.
We don't have it on the agenda, but I will take it upon myself to add it. We will, got a couple of things missing. So we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. All those that are able, please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Also not on the agenda, but I will ask for an approval of tonight's meeting agenda. I'm sorry. Anyone like to make a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Second it.
A motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Motion carries. Okay, first item tonight is approval of the April 8th EDA minutes. It's part of your packet.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes from April 8th.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose?
I'll abstain.
I will also abstain. Motion carries. Next item on our agenda this evening is an election of officers. In your packet, you will find, if I scroll down here, let me get to it. Updated officers the last time an election was held, and you can see we are overdue for doing an update of officers. I would propose tonight we walk through each of these positions one by one, and for each position I will accept a nomination in a second. We'll vote on each and then proceed through the roster in that manner. Does that make sense? First item is President of the EDA. Anybody like to make a nomination for President of the EDA?
I'll nominate Mar Bain to be president of the EDA.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
I've got a question about that.
Absolutely.
And nothing against
No.
anybody,
Yeah.
but is there any conflict of interest with the president of the EDA also being the mayor?
Great question. Patrick, you want to
No, I don't
maybe
believe
talk
so.
on
I
the
think
concept?
I think that if I remember the EDA statutes, it's two members of the EDA have to be from the city council, and being not only tradition but past practice, the mayor has often been the president of the EDA, so I don't believe there's a conflict. I can't remember anything in the statute that would make that a conflict. I actually would think it'd be okay, particularly because it designates two members of the city council to be on the EDA.
All right, thank you.
If I could maybe add on to that, as part of the positions of the appointments that we made at the council level, I considered actually not serving in the president's role. I think that there is some value in having diversity of thought and making sure we've got a range of leaders within the city working towards goals of the city. However, as I was having conversation with staff and our city attorney on the role of the EDA and the authority of the EDA, I was struck with the broad authority that is granted to the EDA, especially on very large transactions. And I think for that reason, it's, you know, the statutes require at least 2 council members to serve on the EDA, but I think if the EDA is going to be successful, we need to have alignment of strategy of the overall city as well as the EDA. Again, it's important to have some diversity of thought and to, you know, many hands make light work. But I think as we're considering structure and role, Given the EDA's authority and also the potential of staff time, I think a most effective EDA is going to be most effective if we have a strong alignment with what council direction is. And so for that, I guess for those reasons, I'm comfortable staying in this role, which has been the tradition. But I appreciate you challenging that and asking the question, perhaps if that is the best structure. I did ask the same question, and that was the kind of conclusion I came to.
Okay, thank you.
Any other thoughts on that? With that, I will call the vote. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? Abstain? Motion carries. Next item, Vice President, formerly held by Blake Roberts.
I would nominate, if he doesn't kick me in the shin, Blake Roberts.
And I'll second that.
An enthusiastic nomination and a second. Any discussion on this item? Hearing none, all those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? Abstain? Motion carries. Secretary, open position as was previously held by Julie LaFleur, who no longer serves on the EDA. I will entertain a nomination for secretary.
Just a question,
Yeah,
the role of the secretary and the next one is.
great question.
The treasurer.
Yep, absolutely.
It
And
seems like a
assistant treasurer.
nondescript role, so go for it. Describe it to me if you want, otherwise I'll just nominate somebody.
Patrick, you want to take a stab?
Sure. I mean, the secretary traditionally, since we have the assistant clerk do the minutes, the secretary traditionally does minutes and records meetings and reviews documents. So while it's not a high functioning, it's still just a formality as far as that goes. And used to, like I said, check the minutes, check documents, things like that, and really keep the order of the EDA. It would be much more important if we didn't have somebody doing the minutes already. So that's really what a secretary does.
And the treasurer?
Same thing with the treasurer, since we really don't have one of the EDA board members act as a treasurer, we have a staff or our contracted finance people act as treasurers, but they look at they create the budgets, review expenditures and things like that, but that's done internally through to the way it's been set up in the past. So, yeah, it's a good point. I don't know how much they really have done in the past. I can't see the problem. And anybody can correct me, I don't think they've done very much in the past in those two positions.
Both pretty nondescript, I think.
I think, though, they're creatures of our bylaws. And then if you look at our bylaws, those bylaws are very robust, again, in the EDA's authority. And so what I read in these types of named positions is just another level of governance that when we are, as an EDA, not doing significant activity may seem to be not as important. But if we are starting to consider very large projects, as this board has done in the past, I think having that governance layer and somebody assigned to those roles is important. I would rather have that as a public oversight than everything to default to staff. Again, probably more important if you're looking on some of the outward bounds of some of the authority that this EDA has. So it was also one of my questions of, gosh, we have an EDA of 7 people, 7 people, do we really need 5 named officers? And if we're getting into very large projects with very large tax impact in particular, I think it's important we have that layer of governance. So it was not my preference that we would consider changing bylaws, but certainly it would be under our authority to do so. There are some statutory limitations, as I understand from our city attorney, but I think my preference, given, again, this is an incredibly powerful board, that we have that level of governance.
I have no argument to that, I'm just curious.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll nominate Mark Finneman as secretary.
There's a nomination.
Shin, can I?
What's that?
Can't kick you in the shin.
Unless you get long toes.
Is there a second?
I would second that.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? Abstain? Motion carries.
Now that I have that increased authority, do you think maybe I could get my name on the web page as part of the EDA?
We absolutely should put your name on the webpage. Are
Okay.
you not on the webpage?
That was the only thing I was looking forward to. Just I
And
wanted
be-
to know.
and let's also spell it correctly, can we?
That'd be good.
That would be good, okay. Next item, treasurer of the EDA. Currently held by Judy Huntosh.
I would nominate Judy Huntosh.
There's a motion, is there a
I'll
second?
second it.
Motion and a second, any discussion? All those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Oppose? Abstain? Motion carries. Next up, assistant treasurer, currently held by Sam Husnick.
I would nominate Sam Husnick.
And I'll second.
Motion and a second, any discussion? All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Very good, thank you, and good discussion. I think as we continue as a board, we should need to make sure that our governance structure aligns with our plan, and always welcome conversations on that, so, good, thank you. Next, go ahead.
Before we go on to the next.
Yeah, absolutely.
As far, you mentioned 7 members. I know Josh has been absent for quite some time. I don't know if there's been any correspondence with him. I know he was dealing with some family things with his dad and that, and so if we haven't reached out, I think we should, to see if he wants to remain on, and if not, get someone in to more input and different qualifications.
Absolutely agree. I reached out to him last week, did not hear back, reached out again today, and we'll continue to try to do so.
I'd hate to see him be gone, but we do need to, we should have that seat filled, there's no question about it.
Agree.
Yeah.
Also speaking to having seat filled, we did not have quorum last time, and so a reminder of, if we're going to continue to do good work, we need to have quorum, and having active members is important, so thank you for bringing that up.
Yes.
Next item on the agenda, ULI follow-up. Dan, I think you're going to walk us through this?
I'm gonna cut my computer in here. Hopefully the technology works here. President, members of the EDA, what I have tonight is the start, or kind of the scoping for a downtown study. To get everything, take a second here to get fired up. To provide you a little bit of background on this, as you can see on the slide in front of you, this actually has been on the EDA's work plan since last year. It was work plan item number 2, which is promote downtown revitalization. So a downtown study would slot right into that category in the work plan. It also was recommended as a project by the Urban Land Institute when they came out. I think this was also kind of driven home by the fact that one of the board members commented that he'd been coming through Forest Lake for a number of years and had actually never visited our downtown. I think it kind of made it very clear that a lot of people coming through don't leave the Highway 35 corridor to get to our downtown. So part of the study would be looking at, possibilities of how do you get people from that corridor into our downtown business area. That being said, this will not be the first time we've looked at the downtown area in the city of Forest Lake. Have kind of viewed this particular corridor a number of times. One of the more recent times was in 2012. We conducted a corridor study. Ryan can speak to specifics on that study, as he was an active participant in designing it and working on it. But the 20,000-foot viewpoint of it was that it started at the Highway 8 and went all the way down to, I think, was it 97 on the south end? Yep. Kind of looked at the entire Highway 61 corridor and looked at how do you develop, the North Gateway District is kind of the bridge into downtown, has a downtown area, and then kind of went further south as well. It focused primarily on streetscape design, what does, some of the aesthetic components of that corridor look like. A couple of comments on there was on the north side, south side, where to potentially put monument signs to get people into Forest Lake. So some of those aesthetic elements were discussed in pretty decent and great detail. It's a pretty robust plan. It's probably 80 or 90 pages full of as much detail as you want on that area. Additionally, back in 2015, the city held a Downtown Business Owners Summit, where we had approximately 50 business owners from the downtown area come and attend. We focused on 3 primary topics of discussion: redevelopment and zoning, transportation and parking issues, business attraction and retention. I did include a summary of kind of the highlights of what came out of those discussions in the EDA package, just to kind of help fuel kind of get you thinking about what were some of the areas or topics of concern back in 2015. Some of those topics have resolved themselves in the time since. One of the big topics was the redevelopment of the City Hall site. That project obviously has been completed with Lighthouse Lofts. There was some additional discussion at that point regarding micro distillery zoning and allowing for like a micro distillery or a tap room to be in the downtown area. We did, after that meeting, pass ordinances that do allow for that business use in the downtown area. So we did kind of proactively zone the downtown area for, say somebody wants to come in and put like a micro distillery in, we do have that zoning capability. And some of those conversations came out of that business owner summit. There is also some things in that study though that have not been completed, so they are still, on the to-do list coming out of that 2015 study. Some of the goals tonight, just to kind of keep the conversation going, would be three main areas. First and foremost is to define the geographical boundaries of the downtown area. I think it's pretty easy to say, we know kind of where the core of downtown is, but once you start to branch out, those boundaries get a little bit fuzzy. So I think if we just accomplish one thing tonight, and that's defining the geographical boundaries, that's a lot moving forward in terms of designing the next level of study for that area. So that's kind of the first and foremost area of topic of conversation for tonight. The next one is a little bit more of a higher level conversation. This is a vision for downtown. I'm kind of looking for here is not so much like the action steps on it, but just basically like what's everybody's kind of vision for downtown? Is it multifamily? Is it retail? Is it restaurants, office space? Kind of just to start throwing out, getting the ball rolling on terms of what that vision for downtown is, because depending upon what the vision looks like kind of sets what, how you go after and try to attain that vision. And then the third area of focus would be just some of those key areas of focus. Staff has identified a key need for downtown is a need to kind of evaluate our current infrastructure, specifically sewer infrastructure, to make sure that if we're putting out and we're trying to, say, attract additional multifamily units down there or higher use buildings that come into our sewer system, we want to make sure that our system can handle that increase in capacity. So as part of this scoping, staff's making the recommendation that we kind of roll in an infrastructure study as well of the downtown area, just to make sure that as we're bringing or trying to attract businesses, that our infrastructure can handle that increase in demand. The current downtown boundary is on the map in front of you. When we kind of identified this, we looked at the MU1 zoning district, which is the mixed-use 1 zoning district. Here is the southern boundary is 3rd Avenue Southwest. Current northern boundary is 4th Avenue Northwest, and then we have on the west side 3rd Street, and then the lake is the east side. So when we look at this from kind of a zoning perspective, this is what the downtown area comes up on a map as. And I apologize for the graphic quality of this one. I pulled it out of the comp plan, so it's a little tough to read, but this is the future land use map that's included in the 2040 comp plan, and the purple area here is what we would consider the MU1 in the 2040 future land use. So you can see we did expand it out in the 2040. We brought it all the way up to Highway 8 and then 11th Avenue on the south side of it. The 3rd Avenue or 3rd Street still maintains that western boundary until you get one portion of it. I can't find the cross street there, but it goes to Centennial. So it's a little bit elongated, same pretty much width moving down. Lake still maintains the eastern boundary there. But I guess at this point I'd like to pause to kind of get some feedback as to, is there a preference as to which one we use as we define the downtown area? So let's say the planner comes in and says, where do you want to study? What area do you want to study? It's easy to say, here's the defined area. So is there a preference between the one that's in the 2040 comp plan or the current boundary, or kind of looking for some EDA feedback on that?
When was the current, what you have, what you're calling the current boundary and what's shown there, when was that set?
I know it was established in 2010 with the adoption of this zoning code. I don't know if it changed, during the aughts.
Okay, thank you.
And not to add one more kind of point of confusion to this as well, but when we went through the downtown incentive program last fall, it actually did expand out slightly along Broadway. We did bring it a little bit westerly on Broadway just to encapsulate some of the smaller businesses that are located directly adjacent to Broadway. So we do have kind of multiple defined maps of what the downtown is. So I guess this is, again, it does help when we're trying to scope a downtown site. The geographical boundary is critical.
Well, I think the downtown boundary plan you have that shows up on the screen right now, other than adjustment to it, because some of it seems to really encapsulate what properties may well be housing properties in the long run, on the north end. At least that seems like it might be the case. I don't know that businesses necessarily or commercial retail district necessarily expands into that North Shore Trail kind of territory there beyond the funeral home. As you go south, you can see, because obviously there's no real depth in the properties down there that are adjacent to the lake, and those obviously are valued pieces of property. I just think that the northern area probably should respond the same way. And I guess you could turn on Broadway and go west and try and expand there, but it seems like Broadway going west is, you know, it's got its own identity. And I'm not quite sure we're trying to talk about a personality downtown and its limits versus how far you can push the edges of a downtown as that image really is no longer a personality image. Do you know what I mean by that?
Well, and that was my question in the whole scheme of cities that have a robust, really thriving downtown. What is the average size of that? Because this is a good long distance where we're like just including everything as you drive through Forest Lake versus what do we want to really focus on as our downtown area? What is really viable to make it thriving, and then maybe it will continue to extend into this, but this includes like everything.
Is your point, and piggyback on your point, is your point concerned that having too large of an area, things get too diluted, and it's better to focus on a concentrated, even, would you say even smaller than this portion?
Yes, and there's been a lot of discussion lately of what is downtown.
When I think of downtown, like Stillwater, any, the ones listed here to compare it to, there are places with sidewalks where pedestrians can go from one end to another. And there's shops, there's things to do along it. But I think sidewalks, pedestrian friendly, really defines downtown.
I think in many ways what happened just literally out there, that you could press a personality downtown, and I'll just choose to use that term, it just makes sense to me, but you can take something that's kind of cohesive, that has a sense of being together by virtue of the sidewalks or otherwise the streetscape that lets you kind of travel and connect it. I think you can push a southern boundary to the Wells Fargo Teller line and what happens right about there, and after that you start to turn into, I'm going to say it wrong, but generic Anywhere USA story, as you do when you start to travel west on Broadway after you get past the Hool property. You will become a certain kind of animal from that point forward. But if you started at the Hool property, if in fact that could be other than housing, otherwise it shuts off somewhere around the trail, you have an opportunity to create a personality that works really well. Going north, it's a little harder to see after Lighthouse Lofts. You have an industrial section just north of it that can quite obviously become something again, although it's been disrupted and stopped by something pretty sizable. It could become something again on that edge, but on the opposite edge where the funeral home is and beyond, it just seems like that's got a different future. And so if you're going to pick someplace and say, let's create an identity, a real focal point, something that works as one, then I think those are sort of the limits that I see to that, and infilling that with strength is where I would tend to focus.
I tend to agree with that. I think it's important to emphasize that those areas outside of those boundaries are incredibly important. However, if there's I think there's benefit to a concentration of focus and get some wins within that concentration of focus and an identity, knowing that expansion's possible, but narrowing a footprint I think is going to make for a more workable plan. As I look at this, how I react. However, we did just have this conversation as part of the comp plan, which we did make some fairly sizable extensions. I think it's probably the difference between long-term planning and near-term planning, and I think our goal is to work on some near-term
More
plans.
near time, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And the thing of it is, we want to maintain the focus on the lake. There's no question about that. So I agree with what Mark was saying. I mean, just based on that alone. And of course, that area, so much of that area north of Broadway there, is ripe for redevelopment, there's no question about it. And if there was some focus we could put on that, and you know, there's a couple of buildings down there that need to go, there's no getting around it. And I'd like to see some focus on that, and at the same time, we'd be able to maintain that lake part of it, you know, the lake presence there, so. Yeah, I think our focus needs to be a little bit narrower than what we're looking at here. So I do agree with the comments so far.
Is there a sidewalk, I should know this, but I don't walk the sidewalks, that far. Is there a sidewalk in front of Stegner's new building and down to Big Apple Bagel?
It is not continuous. I just.
Where does it stop?
There's a new bit.
Well, so there is sidewalks.
Stops at Wells Fargo is the missing link there.
Beyond Wells Fargo's in the.
Then there is a short stretch in front of Steve's.
And then there is a short stretch
Right in front of the building.
that's positioned for future, but it's not continuous on that side of the street.
Okay, I just want to throw this out because it happens to fit, but I've received complaints from people that, like Cherrywood Point, Lighthouse Lofts, that they can't walk down to a coffee shop without, it would be nice if we could somehow consider a sidewalk going down to Big Apple Bagel or beyond. Just keeping in mind that we're putting up these units for people and trying to get them walking downtown. Let's give them a sidewalk to walk on.
I'll just give a brief history of what I know and why things have started and stopped where they may have, and maybe that helps answer some of your guys' questions. So the cities did spend a significant amount of time in planning and outreach back in 2002, which then evolved into the construction project of Phase 1 downtown lakefront reconstruction, which included that mini roundabout east of 61, and then the roadways south of there down through the bank, right? And then they quickly came back in 2005 and did the Lakeside Park Memorial Park reconstruction that included the parking lot, utility upgrades, buried all the overhead power, and then which led in up to the 2010 roundabout construction project. And, you know, as the aesthetics and the streetscaping and the sidewalks and the pedestrian facilities was at its height in there, you know, and then we brought that all together with the roundabout project, which reconstructed everything from second to second on Lake Street. Thus, with that being done, and knowing that the mega project or the county projects was coming around the corner, and then also knowing about 97, 61 coming down, the city then wanted to move into what they refer to as the Trunk Highway 61 Aesthetics and Water Quality Plan, which lays out very well detailed of what I have reviewed applications along the 61 corridor, and thus required the Stegner building to construct sidewalk, part of a site redevelopment project. We also wanted to bury overhead power, but nobody wanted to pay for the cost at the time of that project, so that's why you have the power poles and the sidewalk right now. But that also then brought the consistency down through the 6197 double roundabout project, the streetscaping, that's a lot of the concrete to the same matching. Your plan did, you know, talk about the same light poles, but when MnDOT offered to pay and maintain all the streetlights that are out there, the city quickly backed away, carrying the blue poles down through the double roundabout because of the expense that we know that we've incurred with the downtown project, the Broadway, and we have the blue ornamental railing and poles on County Road 32 as well. So you have all these pieces that have been packaged in all this aesthetics and streetscaping plans that are very well laid out, even to the point where it talks about, you know, the frontage road that goes by Lakes Gas and Dairy Queen, about that frontage road going away and making the road wide enough to accommodate for a huge pedestrian corridor through there and access the businesses from the behind them. So when redevelopment happens, that's what we try to push. Stegner worked with us and put the sidewalk in, but, you know, you're going to have the difficulty of things through the corridor, you know, especially when they're trying to maximize their site and stuff like that. So if you would be proactive, such as we got great sidewalk down to 2nd Avenue, head south on 61, then you got impassable sidewalk from 2nd to 3rd now. You have no sidewalk on the Wells Fargo side. You have 4-foot wide sidewalk on the other side of the road. So that's just where we've started and stopped, and kind of where we're at today. So that's why you have the Trunk Highway 61 Aesthetics Water Quality Plan, because of the core work that was done and the outskirt work that you knew was coming, and you wanted some consistency through the two corridors that included Broadway and 61, So when I'm being strict in requiring sidewalk or lost on the trail on this one right out here, we would have had trail down to Winnick. So I try to do what's in that plan that's been there since 2012, but I sometimes lose when I'm requiring things because I'm either trying to be too expensive or too difficult. But I'm just following the plan that the city approved and adopted.
Yeah.
We don't make things up. We have documents we do refer to in, our review, so. But it's a very nice, detailed document. I encourage you to look through it, and it'll give you a better feel of probably a lot of the processes that the city went through. That included MnDOT, the watershed. I believe the school district was at the table too, so it was a huge cooperative agreement project.
Can we grab that document through the city then and access it in some fashion so?
Yeah, I'll
we
have
can
to try
all
to figure out a way to get it linked out. It's a pretty, I think it's like 25 or 30 meg file. It's a pretty big file. I'll have to set it up in a Dropbox account, but I'll email the link out so everybody can access it because it's pretty graphic intensive, but I can get the link out.
Ryan, do you have any thoughts on the current size of the downtown district to increase or shrink or?
I think it was a common theme through your whole comp plan discussion. You guys wanted more expansion than what was there previously. Maybe some of the southwest quadrant area there is far-fetched, but everything else is within arm reach of a development approval right now in this stuff.
So what if we, just piggybacking on that comment, what if we were careful in defining phase one, phase two, or future phase, so that we aren't setting I don't want to set a set of boundaries in that don't allow for kind of pulling in a larger area where it makes sense. And because so many of these projects are development, depending on future development, if something were to come along that were outside of this, I wouldn't want us to ignore that, but maybe we kind of focus on a central core first and just articulate we do consider expansion.
I like the phasing idea because if we're going to focus and prioritize the core area, for example, maybe that sets up for working closer with development as it comes with much more priority than moving beyond that. That might be our focus and something we're trying to gear developers toward, and that includes having a stronger relationship maybe with those developers for that particular area. And so I'd like to see that kind of a limit to it where we're saying, that's it. That doesn't mean development can't come and jump past that limit and say, we still want to direct your attention out here because this is our outlying area that we'd like to work with. But if we could define that core area that we would call this, quote, our personality downtown, the walkable cityscape, and how to fulfill that so that it does become something that doesn't look like it's a start and stop proposition.
As far as the boundaries, I guess my opinion is it would make easy sense right now just to keep it where it is, the M1. However, to the south, where 4th comes in, maybe a natural would be where 61 comes back together right there. That almost, to me, is just it just says downtown because now you're coming back into it, the divided. And then to the west, just with that stoplight and the Legion and all that going on, I would maybe push that one block to the west. But that's if we wanted to expand it at all. It would kind of be my thoughts on it. Yes.
So what I hear you say is expansion to the south down to 4th, expansion to the west over to
4th is
to the Legion, which is
Yep.
also 4th, and then picking up on Mark's previous comments, pulling back off of North Shore Trail, what's currently residential, pulling that into up to Matson's as being the northern boundary along the lake.
It seems natural anyway, and we've talked about Broadway in terms of trying to push its pressure north and south into the residential territories such that there could be greater depth with all those properties. There's been a series of sketches done about that. And so that that's what really buys Broadway its future opportunity, is to create the depth off of Broadway.
Right.
And if you, I guess we'd have to have a joggy line that jumped a bit rather than 3rd Street to start reaching. I think if you just take Broadway Avenue and you start to talk about beyond the Hool site, there are a lot of little segmented pieces there that eventually will be compiled into larger pieces, but they still suffer the depth issue straight on through. And so I think our comp plan does indicate the push north and south off of Broadway. And maybe that just, because I still look at that as the kind of roadway that has a certain kind of image that's different than what could be the personality image of downtown.
The other thought on, if we're talking about going out for a contract to have a study done, I mean, the scope, the smaller the scope, I guess the cost is going to be less, I would assume, and maybe focus on what we know needs to be, needs some attention, and that we, including that whole property and some of the properties on downtown to the north. That's another way to look at it too, I guess.
Some properties just have an opportunity to move much quicker. We have the downtown that I see has a variety of options to move on. As you move further north and get into the beyond Lighthouse Lofts, there are some very obvious moments right off the bat with Rube's Tire and all, but beyond that it kind of sets up a character that takes a long transition. And the same thing in going south. But that downtown core has some opportunities just in some redevelopment, some just new properties. There's just so much there that says pay attention to us as soon as you possibly can. Define us so that we're starting to work towards some endpoint. In many of this, the development has to come before the parking solution comes, and in other cases, it's the parking solution that needs to make the development come. And so there's just so many things to do within that little scope that you can say, that's our downtown. We're not going to be a White Bear Lake or a Stillwater. We don't have the kind of physical area to do that or the architecture to do that. We become those secondary places very quickly. But the core downtown has a great prospect. And I'd really love to see us focus on that and say, here's where we will try and draw everybody's attention. And here's how we'll join the effort.
So I guess, is it a fair statement to say that if, we speak with the planner, we can just basically say, focus on the MU1, but potentially have those boundaries able to hook into the further north? I kind of like, if I use the map that was from the 2012 study, say we still continue to call it the North Gateway District, saying, allow us to then, piggyback that into that district, same with the Broadway area and then the southern area, but this is the main area that we want to focus on, because it would be easier to speak with the planner saying, just focus on the MU1 district without having to create a second map that's kind of in conflict with this. So they're trying to figure out what's the backstory on that. So we already have defined zoning district. Everything in here has the same uses that are allowed, on all these businesses there. We don't have to try to explain two different sets of zoning code for it. So, but if I can just say on the north, south, and west boundaries, make the plan so it allows for that expansion relatively easily into the other areas, so we can position it for when the north happens, that we already have the core of what we want that to look like. We can just kind of flip it up to the north, same thing to the south. And in the interim, if something develops, we can then say, hey, this is what we want this core area to be, so develop to kind of these standards. Is that kind of a fair summary as to what's been said?
That's what I'm thinking, because you got to maintain that focus on a smaller area, but maintain the larger picture too, the 5 years out or whatever it takes.
If you're okay with that, I'll just kind of start using that as kind of the scope for this, and then we kind of report back on that. So. All right, so we got goal number 1 accomplished. That was the big one. That was the big hurdle to get over. The next one, this is just more of a visioning. So we all talk about downtown. We talk about economic development. Those are very big, broad terms to discuss. This is more visioning. What is the EDA's vision for downtown? And I did put some examples of just other downtown areas just to get people thinking. I'm not saying that we take architecturally, we want to look like Stillwater, we want to look like Canal Park, but look at it more from a business use perspective. Like, White Bear Lake has a lot of the smaller shops that are, independent retailers. Canal Park has a little bit of a mix. It's got a little bit of, some of the, the grandma's restaurant type of stuff that's down there, as well as some small mom and pop restaurants and some other, retail experiences that are there as well. Stillwater, Excelsior, same kind of thing. So it's just, this is kind of the idea, just to try to look at how they've kind of structured their downtowns. But just kind of looking at what is the vision, when we see downtown redevelopment, are we looking at multifamily, retail, office, professional space, new restaurants, just so we can start to look at, when the planner comes in, we say, we've kind of talked about, we want to look at maybe bringing some more multifamily in there and some more, retail space, and maybe, we want to have some more retail space like in, I call them like craft style, the boutique type, establishments, or just kind of what is that bigger vision, so then we can kind of get that plan, we can then dive down back through and say, okay, to try to attain this, these are the steps that we have to do, so we can just start that conversation. So I know it's a big topic, but, kind of what is some of the EDA's vision for what a downtown redevelopment looks like? How would you define success in downtown?
So before we start that, how many, I don't know, what do you call them, doors, keys, how many living spaces are in what we would consider downtown? With the loft, we've got does anybody know that?
Not off the top of my head, I don't,
And then I guess my continuing question is, how many doors would it take to really support more restaurants, more retail, more professional?
and that's a great statement. I think it's, I almost look at this one like the constraints of reality are kind of off right now. It's just kind of like, let's just throw some bigger picture stuff out there so we can at least start to get those, because that'd be the next level questions of like, so if you want to put 2 more restaurants down there, you need to have X amount of foot traffic in there, which some of that's going to come from the residents there, but also from outside the area. You also got to remember too that once you establish this, you could potentially expand your market space out, and you're going to attract people who aren't going to stop at the fast food restaurants on Broadway. They're going to continue to go downtown, so you could potentially expand your market. So I almost look at this as just kind of like just that visioning time where you can kind of put some ideas on the map that are, could be big vision statements, but then we can kind of look back and see, what's the reality of that happening, and start to really kind of funnel down to more of a attainable plan. So I guess to kind of go back, again, the question would be, if in, say, 5 years, 10 years from now, if we kind of go through this period of economic redevelopment downtown, what defines success? Granted, it's a big question. I fully acknowledge it's a big question, but is it, more multifamily and, just 2 more units? Just like, is that something we want to do, or we want to try to focus on the retail side of it?
I think one thing, a general theory of what could happen may well be that the streetscape level, the 61 level, the foot traffic, the idea of having a walkable downtown is more commercial, retail, and hospitality. It's not so much service and professional. You can go up a certain amount vertically maybe it's another story for the professional and the service-oriented businesses that don't have to be that direct contact with streetscape and have the impulse opportunity just to react to what I see in that next door. From that point, going higher is difficult. I've attempted that once before downtown, and taking the commercial service professional vertically can sometimes be very difficult. But housing has the opportunity to be that multi-use or that mixed-use proposition. Housing would sell downtown. Housing facing the lake will sell downtown. It will sell even in a weak marketplace. And so I can see verticality being upward from street level with commercial, retail, hospitality, to on the 61 side of life being more of the service and professional, and that maybe has a limit to its verticality, but on the lake side you have an opportunity to do the 4 stories. Maybe that's too much of a push downtown for too much verticality and too much mass against the lake, but that's the kind of thing I think the marketplace would say works in downtown. And that's different on the lake side, obviously, with the lake view, as it is on the west side of 61, where it could readily become more of a professional arena, professional service, financial, banking, that kind of thing could happen readily over there, as well as restaurants. So on that first level, I don't think we're ever getting rid of hospitality opportunities or retail opportunities, but there on that side of the street, I think you can be certainly much more effective with professional services as well. So I think there's 2 different personalities to 2 different sides of the street, and the lake drives that story, and it also drives the verticality.
Mark just picked up on 2 thoughts. So couple of thoughts that I've had. Overall umbrella concept, focus on the lake and focus on Forest Lake's rich history. And then with that as the umbrella, focused on two different markets. One market being the weekday market, recognizing whatever we do has to be successful Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and then also focused on the nights and weekend market and make it an attractive destination for both, which is going to require some of all of the above of what we've talked about. But I think if you're focused on those two different markets and then creating a spot where both of those markets enjoy the lake, the rich history, it's going to be successful. And also recognizing those can be different. What attracts for evenings and weekends may be different than during the day, but I think you do need a combination of both. We can't have destinations that are just empty during the week, Monday through Friday, during the day, Monday to Friday.
I think, that the housing for me, I go back to that. I go back to what when the panel said and talked about people don't have a problem commuting and driving, but once they get home, they don't want to get back in that car. And so if you can get the housing, I agree with you, Mark. I mean, even a week market, I think there's opportunities there. It'd be interesting to see what the occupancy is on Lighthouse Lofts, what that is. But I just really think that then it drives everything else. The housing drives the rest of it, in my opinion.
Well, and that's why I was wondering how much more housing do we really need to really make it all work? Because I would imagine we still need more.
Yeah.
What's going up across our kitty corner from Winnick's, right off of Centennial? I heard that was high-end apartments?
No, it's not high-end.
Hmm?
It's not.
Encore Apartments,
What's,
Encore Apartments,
Encore?
70-some units,
That's the one that's.
91.
91. They have a pre-con Wednesday.
Similar to the
11th
same-
and 4th.
I would say similar product that's right next to it.
Yeah, that's been through the, yeah.
that's not what I heard, but it's right by the walking trail. So when you're talking about multifamily, that's another one that could get on the trail, walk into town.
They're making a connection to the trail and putting a 6-foot sidewalk along 4th.
Yeah, that's been through the council and all that. I think the downtown apartment situation, I think would be attractive, even more attractive than the other apartment areas because just because of the lake and the fact that you can walk easier to a restaurant or whatever. But, so I agree with Blake on this thing because I think it's a viable solution, or one of the solutions at least.
You look at Stillwater, and 10, 15 years ago, when there was really no housing downtown Stillwater, those places, they struggled all winter long. And they had that summer traffic, like you're talking about, weekend and weekday traffic, winter, summer. But now that there are people living down there, those, they're all still having, you see turnover sometimes, but it's a lot more vibrant down there now that there's all those units to the north of downtown.
If they're walking to the restaurants, then that alleviates the parking problem. If you're servicing the people that are living downtown.
Is there anything going on with the Corbett Johnson home?
I'm sorry, are you asking for an update?
I just have heard stories, and I'm just asking the question, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it would not be an update for me, it would be new news.
Okay. Yeah, I believe it is going to be in private ownership and be used as a residential dwelling for,
So
single.
not multifamily?
Correct.
Okay.
I've exchanged correspondence with the owner today.
Okay.
Okay, then.
Opportunity for multifamily.
Yeah.
And
There was some issues there, though.
my understanding is that, Donna, was that part of that was a watershed type thing where they wanted to get more units on that, try to more compact density, and that it just wasn't allowed? Is that kind of the...
In my I don't know all the facts on that, but in my conversation with the developer, it was the stormwater treatment requirements that torpedoed that project.
That's what I'd heard too.
Viable.
Yeah. It was an issue with the amount of space they were covering there.
Which also brings up one of the things that, we're kind of circling around what's the role of the city and having some of those master planned, stormwater treatment options, and what are we as a city bringing to the table to some of those sites, I think is something that should be on what we're considering, because that's going to be a challenge as each one of those properties we develop.
Because the watershed district is part of the plan now, whether they're a player in all of this, and I think Ryan can even address some of that, but you can take a grandiose plan and get it turned upside down with the watershed district, so just in case.
I've got a question about the office, professional space, retail space downtown. In the notes here somewhere, it said that somebody from the city was going to talk to all the businesses that have left downtown and find out why. I'd like to know what those answers were, like an exit interview, why did you leave? I've gotten a lot of feedback about the high cost of rent in the buildings downtown, and that's a big concern for the smaller business owners. Is there anything that the city can look at to do a more reasonably priced or a scaled rental situation where we subsidize rent for new businesses coming in for a year, and maybe they increase their rents every year until they are successful to help give them a hand up? Any feedback on?
And to speak to the request for kind of an exit interview for businesses that have left, that was more of an ask out of it was a topic that was discussed during the retention and conversation. It never made it on the work plan after the fact. We kind of got put on different, with staff time being limited, we kind of picked our top 3 and worked on those ones. So that one has never been accomplished because there was a lot of research that needed to be done, and we just did not have the staff capacity to perform that.
I heard something this morning that was really interesting. Can I use her name, Susan's name? Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah, no. There's a business in town that pays quite a bit of rent, but her sales are limited. It's a limited market. And her rent is the same per square foot as the endodontist that can recoup it in a couple sets of braces. That's really an imbalance when you're thinking about attracting different types, especially when you're talking about boutique stores or art galleries or whatever coming in where there's not going to be a high volume of big buck sales. How do we make these people come in because we want an attractive, diverse downtown, but yet affordable for them? I think that's a big concern we have to keep in mind.
It would be a unique storyline. Typically the developer and their inherent creation costs set the need they have for a tenant space to be leased out at. I've never thought about what if.
They've got a lot of vacant space over there.
Oh,
That
absolutely.
building, yeah.
And now that it's back on its feet and cleaned up, it's ready to become something again. And whether those rates change to fill it up, there's all sorts of deals made between the landlord and the tenant, whether they change for that way. But I've never thought about that other little dimension where another player could come in and say, boy, that's the greatest business. We want that downtown, and therefore, if it's $20 a square foot, maybe it's not $20 a square foot out of that particular pocket. I just never thought about anybody else being introduced into that story.
Well,
But it's
think about
interesting.
it.
It's awfully interesting.
It would
that
help
way.
out this plan and bring those people downtown.
I can see it initially for a development, it's like we have just, I just can't help but jump right to the properties that could change and do something. And that's where I really see the partner come into play. A landlord and a tenant, and it's harder for me to see the partner come into play there, but maybe it could be.
It takes 3 to 5 years to get a business off the ground, whether it's going to, the average. If we could think of some kind of structured help for those 3 to 5 years, and then they either make it or they don't. It would be, I think it's something we have to think about as a city.
And it's hard to find that incubator space. I've been pressing for the central learning building there to be whatever is a good remnant to save. I've been pressing for it, and at this point in time, it's we will continue to study its story, but that to me is an incubator business area that would just be lovely and adaptable, whereas new construction is not, and whereas we don't have the kind of architecture in this city that adapts to that beginning business and can be an incubator. That is a one storyline, one opportunity proposition sitting there. So I'll just keep pressing that as best I can. And if I could press it through this organization right here, this group, and see if we could find a consensus attitude about that, maybe that would carry more weight than me just continuing to bring the story up. But that building is one of the few, if not the only one in Forest Lake that offers us really that opportunity to build workforce, be it education or otherwise, or incubator businesses. And I have suggested ways that it can be partially used that way, and partially saved and partially demolished. And so I'm just waiting to see if anybody catches hold on that notion. But there's an opportunity. You go downtown, you look at your $4 or $5 per square foot rental, and it's the little old guys that are sitting there that probably shouldn't be sitting there. And those buildings aren't renovatable, many of them aren't. And they just, they're not going to be anything other than new construction in the future. And new construction needs its partner right up front, to help it become something, because new construction costs are tremendous. And so the story of somebody, I still want to hang on to that story though, that you said, with somebody coming in like a city and saying, look, this is a good idea for here, and maybe we can support it in some fashion. That's just interesting.
I think if I could just use that as a segue into the last kind of piece for tonight, this is kind of like the key areas of focus. And one of those areas to kind of look at is, what is the EDA role in this redevelopment? Are we doing the studies to kind of help eliminate some of the unknown costs as you go and redevelop a site? And that's where, the downtown infrastructure study comes into play, where if we're trying to make sure that our infrastructure is able to support, I hear two conversations that we need more multifamily down there. We need to make sure that our infrastructure systems can maintain or handle that increase in capacity. It also helps to, when a developer comes in to do that site development, we can say, we know our systems are going to be able to handle this. There's not going to be that surprise of, oh, by the way, now we got to do this whole other, it spurs another project. So, that's something we could see the EDA kind of helping to facilitate and kind of getting some of those unknowns known. But beyond that, what is kind of the role of the EDA in this development? Are we, last year there was kind of that conversation point of, we maybe want to get into the development game, and with the McCullough property possibility of, like, we want to kind of buy and hold that, and there was kind of the move away from getting into the speculative land business, and then now we're kind of in this, here we want to partner, but what does that look like? So when people come forward with these ideas, we can kind of say, we're looking at it more from the perspective of, we can kind of ensure that we have safe streets and safe infrastructure, and that's where we want to be, or do we want to be something outside of that? And then additionally on the study, are we looking at beautification efforts, trying to help with placemaking? Some of those things that, like with the trail access, can we put some signs on the trail to help direct people to downtown, to kind of elevate the whole area versus trying to pick specific partners? Because when you partner, yeah, we help that individual up, but there's only so many resources to go through. So there's kind of that, you can do it for 2 residents, but you can't necessarily do it for 5 businesses because resources aren't there. But if you do placemaking, that can kind of, raise the tide for all businesses downtown, because you're helping to bring people down there. So just kind of looking at some of those key areas of focus, next, kind of helping to define that role a little bit more, so we know, at the staff level, kind of what direction to go. Like I kind of stated early on, we kind of feel that the downtown infrastructure study is a crucial component of whatever happens downtown, just in the fact that having that study done makes sure that what does come online in the next 5 to 10 years doesn't cause we don't have any big surprises that come forward. So if we can get that known as part of the study, it just puts us better head down in the future. So as we fully build out, we know that our capacity is there. And if we do need to do an upgrade to our system down there, we know it early on, so we can plan for it and then get that taken care of, so we don't hit that barrier with a live project on the line.
Well, I fully see the infrastructure issue, and I guess I'm naive as to at what point we burst past that capability of the existing system or our ability to change that system. So maybe we need to set up a conceptual idea for what we call our core downtown. That's maybe it's maximum utilization, and we do pick functions, and we do draw a guide plan of sorts as to what we think that downtown area could conceivably be, and then test that against what we have for infrastructure, what infrastructure has to be, because I honestly don't know. I can picture things that can go there, but I don't know when I'm going to push too hard on the infrastructure. So maybe we should just conjure that idea up. It doesn't have to be a really terribly formal proposition. It can be something that's drawn relatively quick as long as we have a common mind about how we're layering function and where we're putting it, and then see what we just did to infrastructure.
And I think to the infrastructure, piece of it is that, if we hear that we want to bring in, for example, 3 more multifamily units, they bring 300 units online of individual residencies, we need to make sure that we have the capacity to allow for that to happen. We don't want to encourage a developer to come in and say, yeah, put a 100-unit building in there, then all of a sudden we get to the point where, they put it in there and their system backs up and we have this major issue. Or by doing that, all of a sudden, to ensure that happening with the pressure of that development on site, plus then we have to force to do that infrastructure improvement at that time. We may not have the cash flow to do that. So by doing this study, we can say we have the capacity for X, we can build out to it. If we want to go beyond that, then we can say, okay, in the next 5 years or 10 years, we can plan to do this project here, so we don't have these, we can basically better plan our infrastructure improvements. So, I think this is kind of a linchpin in a lot of this studying right now, because, it's great to talk about bringing all these different rooftops in there and businesses and all these other uses, but we just got to make sure that when they flush the toilet, it goes where it needs to go and doesn't get stuck or doesn't overflow the system, because,
So there's nothing that would stop us from doing that conceptual plan. Within the context, the land will tell us a lot about what we can do, and then you can add the element of here's what a development could potentially be, and we can put those two things together and draw just this layered proposition of what our downtown core could be, and wouldn't that then lead us to the discussion about where our infrastructure stands? There's a limit to how much housing you're going to put downtown. You can call it, you can actually foresee it at this point. And you can see what properties work that way and which properties don't, and what you can sell, when you can't. So you could define this right now.
Correct, but I think what we're trying to establish with this study was basically what's our current, so say the capacity is 100%. Are we at 60%, 70%, 80%? And what does that vision add? Does it add another 50% to it? So do we go over that, and I think you're right, we can plan out what's the total number, model it out to say, we can put in X amount of units in here if we fully build out these parcels, all multifamily. We don't know what our current position is in the infrastructure, so we don't know what's left in that, how much of that window is left open for that excess use.
But you could begin there, certainly. To tell us how we stand on percentage and what's the capacity there seems to be in the future. And then we can develop that model and see what that means in terms of pushing that limit. Or maybe it'll tell us what we can, see, I don't know what we can expand or change to become more modernized. You'll tell us about the existing.
Correct, yeah, that'd all be there, so we're looking at, the ideal would be we come back and say we're operating at, this is probably the wrong term for it, but say 70% capacity within the current pipe system. So if we bring on, 50 more units, that puts us at 80%. We just gotta know where we currently stand, so we have our baseline established, so we know how much growth that we have in there, and we could be fine. We don't know that, and we don't really want to get down the road on these great plans if we don't have the infrastructure in place to support that. And I think that's kind of why we're looking at bringing this in.
Ryan, there was no sewer water upgrades in 2010 when the streets were put in?
We lined some pipe, but no means or method of obtaining additional capacity was completed at the time. You basically have 2 pipe, so they merged somewhere, just guessing off the top of my head right now, kind of behind your store, by the Ace Hardware store there, where the 2 pipes come together, and then one veers up and goes up 61 and goes all the way past Lighthouse Lofts. The other one will come right up in front of the Hool site, on the west side of the Hool site. So you got those 2 pipes, obviously, we're talking 1960s to late 70s construction when you get in the northwest part of the city. So you have your, I think what Dan's getting at is you have your theoretical flow. You sit down and calculate the number of units and guesstimate how many units and gallons per use per day. Then you have your actual flow, because I&I and what types of use of buildings have changed over time, and we may not obviously know or not really permitted to the level that, you do a new housing development. You got 10 new units, it's going to be this many gallons per day estimated, right? So then you would place flow meters in several spots through the lines to get actual flow. You can either place them in dry times of cities to get the dry time flows, or, obviously to account for the direct I&I during rain events, you have solar powered rain meters right on top of all this stuff too. So you can get more narrow in those calculations. So that's what I think Dan was talking about in our comp plan update, and we have to prepare a sewer plan. It's based on zoning, you know, so you take the theoretical and a total build out with your comp plan as submitted. You do not have capacity, but you already knew that by changing that to the zoning that you did in the extents. You also don't have capacity in the Met Council line if Forest Lake was all built out tomorrow. But that's why we submit that plan to the Met Council, so over time, improvements can be made. And at some point, there will be no way they can make any more improvements, so they're gonna plop a plant right in the middle between here and St. Paul somewhere, right, to account for that. And we'll probably be far enough in technology where that would be a reuse system. You know, and something that you would study, you know, maybe you find efficiencies now, and you gotta deal with them now, otherwise you can't approve any future applications north of a certain point. Therefore, you knew you would then have to drop a lift station somewhere and pump it back by force main. You can directionally drill a pipe pretty easily all the way back to where you do have the capacity. Met Council line goes up to Forest Road up to County Road 32 or 11th Ave. So that's, you know, where you're really at. I think it's Dan's talking about. So obviously when the stuff came forward with the pool project, I got a little nervous. Because that was a lot of flows that potentially coming, so that would have been a specific site. You would have had to require them to do their own sewer study if they wanted to go right now. Just like you did out by Cub Foods with that development that got shut down because of sewer capacity, the east side of Everton Avenue, which is now abandoned land. Because they would have to do some upgrades to meet what they were proposing. So that's what I think, Dan, you're trying to be proactive to allow economic developments and, you know, especially when commercial or property wants to come in development, be ready. No, we gotta do all this. You know, you've heard enough of those stories.
Yeah, I think that's exactly, I mean, Ryan said it a lot more eloquently than I did in terms of the study, but that's exactly the point. We're just trying to ensure that whatever happens on time, that we have the infrastructure to support it, because, you know, we need to know those numbers so we can tell people, yes, this makes sense, or no, we have to do an improvement here first. So getting the data, getting the baseline, you know, and if we're able to roll that into a downtown study, I think there's benefit to that, because that will help to drive what can go into downtown Forest Lake as it goes through our redevelopment phase.
Those are all players, all factors.
So we talk about how we can kick that off, huh?
Yeah, I mean, and I think, you know, from based on the conversation here, I have enough to kind of go back through now to kind of, you know, because downtown study before was just, you can throw a dart on the wall, but now there's more focus behind it, so now you can kind of go back, level it down to the next level, bring it back forward. Again, I've spoken with Chris about the potential of applying this as another CDA grant application. He said, you know, this would, you know, depending upon scope, would qualify for that, so we want to make sure that we build to make sure that it does qualify for that. We do have a little, depending upon the amount, we may need to go to the CDA board for them to approve it if we go over that $10,000 threshold, which the infrastructure study potentially would be over that threshold. So we have some dates that we need to, I got to be cognizant of to make sure that I get the applications done. We still have time to get everything approved, you know, for it, so we can start this process moving forward. But this definitely did help to align, focus on the scope and everything. So I have enough now to kind of go back and get that next level where when something comes forward with actual some executables on it, that I'm not out in left field completely.
Well, I think the downtown is now that it's risen as an idea with Chris to talk about that as a grant proposition. The downtown, I think, rises up in my mind as being probably the most important thing to try and go after another, you know, partnership with the county and see if we can't actually start to answer some of these questions we've talked about tonight. I would have thought about other properties, but this municipal system down there could be something that we could actually get some help with and talk about as soon as possible. So I'd love to see us go in for that grant.
I will start working on it.
Other feedback for staff on this topic? Dan, do you have what you need?
I do.
Terrific. Great discussion, everyone. Next item, Q1 work plan update. Dan, we talked about a number of these things Anything else you would like to highlight tonight?
No, this is on the agenda because I just wanted to make sure, so we went through all kind of the work of starting the work plan and kind of wanted to show that in the first quarter what was actually accomplished. There's actually a few things that we did, knock off we re-updated the work plan at the beginning of 19 here. There's a few things that are actually, done and completed or in process. We did the Urban Land Institute, kind of a market study that was done, so that one was completed. Got some great feedback from both the ULI and the EDA, kind of started some good conversations. One of those was tonight's conversation, so highly valuable there. The pre-development grant project for the city-owned parcel down in Headwaters, just want to give a status update on that. That was approved by the CDA board, so we did get authorization from the CDA, so the grant was approved. Ryan has let the subcontractors know and lined up the work to be completed. Spoken before the meeting, it sounds like the wetland delineation could be done as early as this week or next week, and the phase one work should follow suit, relatively quickly. So we should start getting the results from that relatively quick. One thing that we did not do any work on in the first quarter was the virtual spec building project. That was, if you recall, we looked at potentially taking the city lot down in the airport business park and running it through a virtual project approval to kind of say, if somebody comes in with a project that fits this dimension, kind of sites in here, we've already kind of walked through a virtual approval. Obviously, we don't want to put anything on there that gives it like a legal approval, so each project has to come through on its own merits, but it'd be more of an exercise to say, hey, what type of project goes through this? So it gives a little bit of assurance to developers saying, if I build something similar to this, it's already been discussed at the multiple levels within the city. No work was done on that, and even in quarter two, I have not worked on that because we've kind of been, the downtown has kind of risen on top of that, so that's where most of the focus has been. Workforce Summit, still incomplete, looking at doing that probably later, maybe in the fall, although Chris may have an update during his updates on that. Asset list, we went through and kind of re-drilled back down at a previous EDA meeting. I'm just going to go back through and finalize those, so we will have the asset list. That again, too, during the ULI study was something that was important for a city to have to kind of, they all said Forest Lake has it, but we need to define what it is, and that asset list will help to define what the it is in Forest Lake. And then the approval of a downtown redevelopment application. We spent quite a bit of time tonight on that, so we're getting close on that. So I'll keep bringing these quarter updates forward just so the EDA can kind of see what work has been done, even if there's no update on a specific item, just so as long as we're kind of seeing that progress is being made. But quite a bit of work was done in quarter one, so that's more of just a summary of what we've done to date.
Very good. Any questions for Dan? Excellent. Other, Chris, Washington County update.
President and members, good evening. Just to highlight, Dan did mention briefly, we talked a little bit about the workforce development component of our work plan. And coming up later this month, we've got a meeting set up with the principal and the new career pathways coordinator at the Forest Lake High School to start those discussions. I have to tell you that I was amazingly impressed by the curriculum that the high school has in place. It just, it wowed me. I was so impressed by what they're doing right now as far as career pathways. And what we're trying to do is make the connection between the schools and the businesses and making sure that they're connecting with workforce development programs that are being offered throughout the county. So we've got a meeting set up with the principal here later on this month, and we'll be able to report back to you. But we're starting, as Dan mentioned, to start laying the groundwork for that connection to take place to make sure that the businesses that are here have a steady supply of talent to fill those jobs, as well as be able to offer our talent to folks that are looking to come into this area and expand and maybe relocate a business here. So we're pretty excited about that connection. But if you haven't had a chance to get out and take a look at the high school's curriculum, it's just really impressive. Love what they're doing out there. And just very briefly, I'll mention one of the other things that we have as part of our work plan is marketing and promotion. Patrick and Dan are helping me plan the third annual East Metro Development Summit, and we're going to be looking for input from staff to decide how that summit looks. Last year we held it at St. Thomas University, and I think we had about 115 people there. This year we're moving it over to Golden Valley and trying to attract some of the site selectors and commercial real estate brokerage folks from the West Metro to get them to see what's available here in East Metro and to tell our story. So maybe even having Patrick or Dan speak on that panel like Dan did last year. And Aaron has done in the past, so we're pretty excited about that development opportunity coming up in August. I think with that, I'll answer any questions you might have, but I think that's the end of my report.
Any questions for Chris? All right. And Nanette is not with us tonight.
I can do a chamber update for you.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm the chair of the Chamber of Commerce, so I'm up to date. We had a very successful first-time wine walk of vendors on the lakeside of the street downtown on Thursday night. There were 50 to 80 is between people that came through, which we were very pleased with because it was put together as kind of a trial to see how this would work. Started at Le Grand Salon, did the green door, did mod props, mad props, and ended at Ernie's. It was Salon Envy in the hemp store. Great turnout. The feedback was there were a lot of people that came through that had no idea some of those stores were there. Unbelievable, because it's our town. And that's exactly what the goal was, is to get them in the door and find out what it was all about. So the plan is to expand it and do a fall event and have both sides of the street and expand it. So it was a great turnout. And before you adjourn, we do have something that we wanted added to the agenda, but there's two ladies there from the idea of beautification that would like to speak before you adjourn.
Sure, absolutely.
Good evening. I'm Connie Grabovi, and I'm a member of I would say, volunteer group, all volunteer group of women mostly, and we are working at trying to beautify downtown. And so we've been meeting since, I think, January. And we helped to support the wine walk by being the volunteers during the wine walk. So our whole mission for this group of volunteers is to help beautify downtown, help create events that we as citizen community members can help support and run. And to get to the point tonight, because I know time is short, I'm here as a representative from this group. Ideally, we would like business owners that we're working with to be the people that come to you to do the ask. However, you have me tonight because the business owner that we selected had a prior engagement. So we would like some funds to do some beautification downtown, and specifically the project that we are working on is to do some big, substantial flower pots downtown. And we have a master gardener that is willing to help us create these. However, we need the supplies to do the event, to do the container gardens themselves. So we would need the actual containers, we would need the soil, and we would need the plants or the flowers to go in these big containers. And we're thinking 6 to 8 ideally. So we're asking for $1,000 from the EDA for this project.
Would they go on streetscape on the sidewalk side of life and down on 61?
Yes. Yep.
Where are they going?
So we haven't gotten that far yet in our planning. So really our deadline is June 15th because we really would like it to be presentable for the July 4th activities and throughout the summer. So we're open to feedback as to where these containers would go downtown. We have some ideas of where we'd like to see them, but certainly if we received some funding from the EDA, we would be completely open to some suggestions. And we would be the worker people that would actually be willing to do these containers to have them available for downtown. And then there would also be an ask of the business owners to sort of take ownership of these containers. And we also would like in the future to have these have some tie back to the city. So something on the container, in the container that represents Forest Lake and a theme to make it a theme throughout the downtown area. So we're open to ideas. However, we have this June 15th deadline that we came up with. So we're here asking for the money, basically.
Connie, could I get a sense of the scale of the container that you're talking about?
So we want it to be rather substantial. So because the containers that are hanging from the poles are absolutely beautiful downtown. So we want something that actually is going to draw the eye to the business. So those do a wonderful job of making, and that picture I thought we had up earlier was, the city looks beautiful with those. So we certainly don't want to take away from that, but we're wanting containers that are, you know, fairly substantial, big. That is going to be like a wow factor when you come
On-site,
downtown.
is that the thought?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Other questions? And I have a question for Dan's. How, logistics, requests, what can we do to shepherd this along?
You have a budget, I believe, to.
Yeah, we have budget, I have to make sure, I mean, we would need the specifics as location, size, budget numbers, kind of a, you know, we can work that through, but if you have a June 15th deadline, we could get it something in the next 2 weeks packaged up for consideration. It just, you know, we just got to make sure everything's kind of,
Some kind of concept plan.
yeah.
Could we have perhaps the group work with staff with a plan to come back to us on our May 27th meeting?
Yeah.
Is that
Absolutely.
just nail down some details?
Yes.
Work through whatever red tape we might require? And
Absolutely.
hopefully it's
So we
minimal,
just
but-
wanted to get on the radar tonight, basically, was what our intention was.
But I think this kind of goes hand in hand with the things we've been trying to do downtown as far as tax incentive and all. It's not a tax incentive certainly, but it's certainly something that would, those tax incentives are always involved in trying to beautify something, a new front or whatever the case may be, and this certainly can't hurt.
Something to think about, just 2 cents, and you probably have a whole host of thoughts on this, but ongoing maintenance and, you know, those containers we have today on the street are served by a drip line, and that helps with ongoing maintenance, and we want to make sure that they look beautiful on day one, but also look beautiful in August when it's hot. And
Absolutely.
Survivability, so we could continue to use them each year, so that's another factor in the whole story.
Yeah. And we have a whole host of ideas. We are an idea group, but we're also willing to do the work. So I think we're kind of a unique group. So we have some ideas that we could reuse these containers throughout the different seasons. And one of our ideas for the fall, this is not my idea, it's an idea that some of the women in the group came up with, is to do like a scarecrow decorating contest to tie in the lake, and then also bring families downtown, and then the different businesses could either display them in their shops or their shop window. We could also display some of these containers that we have downtown. And also a similar idea for the winter season, so having the different seasons represented so they would be utilized year-round.
One thought just on that, the seasonal part is, you know, I've been suggesting that for years, and Public Works has always shot that down because of snow removal. So that's something you might want to talk with Dave about, because that has been an issue or a concern.
I think you have a receptive group here, so we just need to define it a little bit better so we can, and maybe that's just working directly with staff.
Okay, perfect.
On a locational and just go Google some ideas of what those things are, those
Great.
large containers, and I think you're going to have a friendly group,
Wonderful. And should I work with Dan?
I would presume.
yes, please.
Okay.
I said May 27th, that's actually Memorial Day. Is our next
May
week
28th.
May 28th, Tuesday, May 28th. So work together the next couple of weeks, and then we can get it back on our agenda for reconsideration on the 28th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sort of in line with that, if I just, a quick question, is there anything that stops, is it 2nd Street Avenue, Lighthouse Lofts, frontage road on the south side, for being ready in the 4th of July?
Brian, want to give us an update? Brian's favorite topic.
That was my question.
So we have a contractor that's supposed to come this week to do some corrective work, and we've also been told there will be tolerance in the Class 5 for the gravel, and get it prepared for base course paving this week. That's what we were told today.
Good story.
So once that's all done, then they can get behind the curb and do other flat work, which include the remaining sidewalk and restoration, and then it would be set up for final workhorse paving and striping.
So it's believable that the street surface itself, for the sake of the 4th of July parade,
I just gave you the schedule that I was told today.
I wasn't more concerned about sidewalks necessarily. I think. Well, let's just hope, because it'd be nice to have it this
Oh,
year.
that's a better report than we've gotten for a while. So thank you, Ryan.
We wish it were under our control, or had greater control.
Yeah, we need to push.
All right, nothing else on our agenda. And with an alarm, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion second. All those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. And we're adjourned.
Good timing, Judy, good timing.
You too.